it's imperative that you spend the right amount of money on the building. You can no longer do a lick of paint and a new carpet. You have to do a proper job, and you have to create best-in-class product. If it's not capable, or you don't have the budget or time to turn that building into best-in-class, forget it. It might as well go in the tertiary bin. You can't scrimp and save, and you can't do anything in a hurry. You need to consider these buildings and just get under the skin of how on earth are we going to get people back to the office. And your buildings need to be the ones that attract those people back.
Welcome to the People Property Place podcast. Today we're joined by Chris Hunt, co-founder of V7. V7 is a creative and forward-thinking asset and development management company, passionate about transforming mismanaged office buildings or sites into dynamic, highly sustainable, service-led workspaces. Working with partners including institutional funds, family offices, private equity and individual investors, V7 add value to buildings by repositioning them in line with the very latest workplace trends and ESG credentials. Chris set the business up in 2015 alongside his co-founder Zak Veasey, having worked at Cushman and Wakefield and legal and general investment management. Chris is responsible for development management and investment day-to-day, and then V7's business strategy, new concepts, marketing and growth. Chris, I know you like to have a lot of fun at work, but you also take some things very seriously. So much so, when you were invited onto this podcast, in order to get match fit, you went off and did a warm-up gig elsewhere first. So I appreciate you coming on, and welcome to the People Property Place podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So look, we'll get on to V7, why you set the business up, some of the values and where the business is at today, and also what your plan is for growth there. But a place that I always like to start these conversations is, how did you get into real estate?
Well, originally, when I went to university, I actually did one of the most woolly, possibly the most uneducated degree courses you could possibly do, which was called Recreation and Leisure Management at Cardiff Polytechnic. So not a massively well-known university, but nevertheless I got a place there. The course Recreation and Leisure Management was as woolly as it sounds, and instead of it being called Recreation and Leisure Management, it got shortened to Rec and Leisure Management, which in turn got shortened to Sex and Pleasure Management because there wasn't a lot of work being done. But on the back of that, the reason for doing that course was actually to go and take over from my dad's business. And he was a golf course architect. So I thought it'd be great to swan around the world, winning new golf course architecture mandates. But after 3 years of uni, I decided that probably wasn't for me. So coming fresh out of uni, super hungry, super ambitious, what do I do? Didn't have a clue. Went to speak to a couple of careers advisors. And they said, you talk a lot, so why don't you become a recruitment consultant?
You should have.
Maybe I've wasted.
We're actually looking, so if V7 goes down the pan,
I'll send you my CV.
Call. Yeah, exactly.
So I became a recruitment consultant in the IT sector, but couldn't have timed that worse if I'd tried. And it was actually right at the .com crash. So I think I was the only recruitment consultant in the UK ever to have never placed somebody. So pretty good track record.
So how long did you stick it out for?
I think 2 years, no, a year and a half maybe.
A year and a half?
Of never placing someone, yeah.
Wow.
Thick skin.
That is thick skin. Most people get chopped after 6 weeks.
Yeah, I think I was just quite nice to be around in the office. So anyway, then after a while, one of the key clients of this recruitment consultancy was a company called 3, the mobile phone business. And I happened to find myself in a meeting where they were looking for someone very specific, and that was they were looking to recruit somebody that would set up an online mobile phone retailer. And I was sat in the meeting thinking, this doesn't sound too hard. I'll put my hand up for it. So in the meeting with my boss and the client, said, what do I do?
Having done no placements?
None of that before. So, which was it was great because they turned around and said, yeah, let's go for it.
In front of your boss?
In front of my boss, with him,
with his client.
With his client,
talking about a job, and you said, "Oh, I'm gainfully employed, but I'll take the job, or I'll throw my name in the ring."
Yes, I mean, but what we actually did is we set up a new business, which my boss owned with me, and then we set up a joint venture between us. So it wasn't as simple as me just jumping ship. Anyway, nevertheless, set up this online mobile phone retailer, sold thousands of 3 phones back in the day when they were, the size of a brick, and you could video call on them, which was a novelty. And eventually sold so many, and the phones were so bad that we had so many complaints about these phones. I spent my entire time just fielding complaints for 6 months solid. And at that stage, I decided maybe mobile phone retailing is not for me. My dad was an architect. My mum was a conveyancing lawyer. And I lived in Bristol at the time. And I thought, what can I do that'll be more interesting? So I wrote a business plan, gave it to my mum and dad and said, can you lend me some money so I can go and buy a house and convert it into some flats? Having never done that before either. And they said, yeah, okay, here you go. So I was fortunate enough to be able to have parents that they lent me some money. So I went and got a huge mortgage. Back in those days, it was 100% mortgage. So I used the cash to do it up.
And how old were you at this stage?
I'm going to be 21, I guess. Bought a house in Bedminster in Bristol, converted it into 3 flats, sold it. In those days, you couldn't go wrong. So sold it for a profit, paid back my parents. And with the proceeds, I funded myself to go back to university. So I went and did a master's at UWE in Bristol in real estate management. And so at that stage, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to be in real estate. I thought I was going to do a resi development course at UWE and ended up doing a commercial construction course, essentially. But I loved it and met some amazing people. And actually, one of my business partners, Matt Leach, was on the course with me. So we forged a great friendship there. And at the time, once I finished, I was lucky enough to land a job at Cushman and Wakefield. That was a pretty challenging recruitment process, in the fact that I applied to everybody, all of the major firms, to go on their graduate training program, and only got offered one interview, which happened to be Cushman and Wakefield. So did the interview, then went through this placement section where we would go and get involved in a maths test, an English test, and sort of a piece of case study coursework, team building sort of assessment. And finished that day. Had a call a week later from the head of HR saying, how do you think it went? I think I said the maths and English was testing, but the rest of it was quite good fun. And he said, well, yeah, you were in the bottom 5th percentile of those that have taken the maths test. So I was like, oh no, this doesn't bode well. But in the team building and the other direct interviews, you performed really well, and we'd like to offer you a position on the graduate training program.
Did that feedback you get in that interview, did that ring true throughout your kind of school career?
Yeah, useless. Absolutely useless. I mean, my GCSEs and A-levels were pretty suboptimal, and I'm just not a huge academic. I love talking to people. I like learning by being on the job, but I'm pretty useless at applying myself in terms of exams and tests. So found myself on the graduate training program, which was fantastic. Met some amazing people. Most of the people that I trained with on the graduate training program are now either clients or pretty big hitters in the industry, which is amazing to see everyone come through the ranks. And luckily enough, got my APC and found myself in a leasing role. So I was part of the national leasing team at Cushman's for a few years. Then I moved to the office investment team. Again, met some amazing people, did some interesting deals. But all the way through, when I joined Cushman's right at the beginning, I knew there was something in me that wanted to set up my own business from the start. So
even before Cushman's or while you were at Cushman's?
It was sort of in between. Whilst I was doing up these houses, thinking this is great, I'm sort of self-employed, and then starting a job at Cushman's, I always knew that there was something in me that was forcing me to go out and set up on my own. And it was really, I suppose, halfway through my graduate training program, I realised, right, this is it. I now need a well-considered path on how to get there. So I drew this chart, which I funnily enough had on my fridge for ages, which was basically a time along the bottom and then position along the vertical axis. And I was like, right, okay, I'm going to work in the leasing team for 2 years, the investment team for 2 years, then I'm going to go client side and get an asset and development management job, and then I'm going to go and set up on my own. And almost to the day, it came true. And I think that's because I just had a really clear vision of what I wanted to do and when I wanted to do it by. So after my Cushman spell of leasing and investment,
did you because you said you're a good talker and clearly very gregarious and personable and enthusiastic, naturally your skill set aligned to leasing and investment rather than management and valuation?
Yeah, I should have probably done valuation because it would have helped me a lot more than just chatting to a load of people trying to lease some office space. But I think leasing, I was a natural fit because I was massively enthusiastic into every building that I was in. And the same goes for investment. I mean, it's obviously more technical in terms of the valuation side, but I think showing buildings to investors, explaining them the opportunity, and getting to come on the journey of how great the investment could be, that was probably my strong point. But then I knew once I covered off leasing, I know how to let a building, and then I covered off investment because I know how to buy and sell a building. What I'm missing is the bit in the middle, how to transform these buildings. And actually, that's the bit that I really love, it's the full cradle to grave experience, I suppose. So leasing is only a moment in time, as is investment. But then I went to Legal & General, where I became an asset manager and looked after all the office stock in the PAIF fund for Matt Jarvis, which was amazing. I mean, we saw huge growth during that time. But also I ended up being able to deliver a lot of refurbishments through that time, did a lot of re-gears with existing tenants. And the metric that I would use there is what the valuation went from quarter to quarter. And if it started to go up, I was responsible for that value creation. So after a few years at Legal & General, I then had the leasing, had the investment, or actually the other way around, had the investment on the buy side. I could deliver the asset development management, and then I could sell it at the end. And that just felt like a natural fit. So when a good mate of mine, a guy called Ross Taylor, who runs Vengrove, he said, "Oh, you should meet this other guy called Zak. You'd be great together," because we were talking in the pub about potentially me going out on my own. So he facilitated this meeting with myself and Zak in a basement in the middle of Mayfair. And Zak can talk more than I can. So it was amazing. He talked at me for 2 hours. I talked at him for 2 hours. Poor Ross was stuck in the middle. I think he probably drank about 9 coffees. And after that one meeting, Zak was totally different to me. He's just got a totally different mindset and different way of doing things. But actually together, they're so different that we just work really well together, and we knew that from day one.
1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great experience, and so we decided pretty much there and then that we'd go and set up a business.
And what was Zak doing at that stage?
So Zak had been at Cummins Commercial in the West End for a while doing professional work, so lots of landlord and tenant re-gearing, lots of leasing. But then he set up on his own, and was a one-man band asset manager. And he had a couple of private clients that he would service. And Zak found himself in a position where he wasn't big enough to grow and recruit, and didn't have enough business to do that. But he had enough to sort of keep himself afloat. So we decided he would bring that existing stuff. I would sell a buy-to-let property that I had in Bristol and put some money in. And together we thought we'll go and grow this thing and become an asset management platform. And the reason that we thought it would work was we thought step one would be to go into all of these big institutions like Legal & General, where I'd just been, and say to them, guys, your asset managers have got 60 or 70 assets each. Give us the hardest 3 or 4, and we'll spend more time, more energy, and drive more value out of those 4, because we've got the time and the expertise, and we can pour over it in terms of detail. And then once they're relet or re-geared or refurbished, we can hand them back to you so they're dry, and your asset managers can look after them, and they're less labour intensive for them. which in principle sounds like a great business plan. Sadly, we went to see everyone. We went to see Aviva, Legal & General, M&G, Schroders, you name all the big names. And they all turned around and said, it's a great idea, but we tell our investors that we do this ourselves and our asset managers can do this themselves. So there is no work for you here. And Zach and I, after about 6 months, thought, oh God, we could be in a bit of trouble here. And then we ended up working or speaking to a guy called Robert Wolstenholme. Again, great guy. He runs a business called Trilogy, which sprung out of Resolution at exactly the same time we set up V7. And he had gone under offer on a very, very large asset in East London with LaSalle. And we got on with Robert really, really well. And he was looking for a team to help him deliver this huge project called Republic. And we put up our hands and said, why don't we work for you? So V7 worked for his business Trilogy, and we transformed this massive campus together down in East London, which was our first gig, I suppose. But it was 600,000 square feet as your first asset. So Zach and I worked together on that quite well together for a number of years. But during that time, my old mate from university, Matt Leach, joined us. There was then 3 of us, and Matt's role was to expand V7 and grow the business as quickly as we could. So he spent 100% of his time going and talking to investors, understanding their issues that they have with their buildings and how we can help to improve them. And after about a year, they came like buses. We had a number of projects on with Kames Capital, which is now Aegon, and CBRE Global Investors. And once we started to deliver these schemes, and obviously delivering Republic with Robert, it started to snowball. So we'd do a good job, someone would hear about it, we'd get approached by somebody else, can you help us with our building? And over time, over the first 3 or 4 years of V7, we completely transformed as a business. We went from what we thought was going to be an asset management platform for the institutions to a development specialist, a development management specialist, delivering refurbishments and then going through with the reletting of these spaces for a mixture of investors, from private equity, high net worth, through to the normal institutions. And then over time, the asset management side started to slip away and our refurbishments got bigger and bigger. And we went from, it was a sort of super organic process. We went from refurbishing 10 to 20,000 square feet to suddenly finding ourselves developing 100,000 square feet. And since then, in the last, say, 4 years, the business has completely morphed into a full-scale developer. So we now partner with all sorts of private equity and institutions still, but we tend to source the opportunities, we underwrite them, we write the business plan, we go through on the buy side. So using the investment knowledge, we then have to deploy that business plan. So it's incredibly important for us to appraise these projects properly so that we can actually deliver them as we say we would. So there's no point in pushing the numbers too hard and then under delivering. But if you don't push them hard enough, you're never going to buy them. It's a really difficult balance there. And then see the developments through. So most of us, I suppose, our sweet spot is taking 1970s, 80s buildings, ripping off the non-performing parts, so all of the M&E, usually the facades, and rebuilding them, putting them back to the best-in-class offices you can possibly produce. They have to be flooded with amenity. So we've got buildings with indoor cinemas, outdoor cinemas, huge gyms, quiet rooms, libraries, all sorts of interesting, great spaces for people to be, and things that people don't have at their homes, so they're a reason to come back to the office. They have to look beautiful, so we focus very, very heavily on interior design and make sure that it's not just, oh, do they look nice? When you walk through the front door, what do they feel like? Does it smell nice? Does it sound nice? Is the person incredibly friendly to you when you walk in, or are they a hostile security guard? What's the first thing you touch? Does it feel good? Where are you going to sit? Is it comfortable? Like all sorts of very, very detailed points that help morph and change these buildings into spaces that people really want to be. And then lastly, but most importantly, is the ESG agenda. So we focus almost entirely on reuse of existing buildings. We've only got one new build scheme on at the moment, and that's because the existing building is simply not reusable. The slab to slab heights are very, very low. The building's very small on a very large plot. But so what we tend to do is focus very heavily on the reuse of existing frames and structures, which saves a huge amount of embodied carbon. And then we put it back together very, very carefully. And we have a policy that we use at V7, which is called the use less, waste less policy. And what that means is that us and our team, we always challenge at every stage, can we put less into a building? Because if we're putting less in there, there's less embodied carbon being used. And therefore, it's the most efficient and greenest refurbishment we can possibly produce. So we put these buildings back together, as I say, focus very heavily on amenity and interior design, relet them, and then sell them at the end. And that's the process we're going through with 30 odd projects at the moment. We have a team of 17 people, from development managers, asset managers, investment managers. We've also got a load of analysts and all the guys doing the sort of grunt work on reporting. And we're now this little brigade of people just loving transforming old tired buildings and giving them longevity and obviously a reason to survive, rather than just bulldozing them and knocking them down.
So at the time when you set V7 up, what was the risk personally for you doing that? Because you're walking away from legal and general investment management, amazing business and amazing projects. What was the kind of the personal risk at that stage for you?
Do you know, when I think about it, it feels more risky than it did at the time. As I said, I sold this buy-to-let, so I had a little bit of money behind us, but that would probably have only lasted us a year maximum, maybe even 9 months. The risk, I suppose, I didn't have any children. I knew I had a great sort of grounding at Cushman Wakefield in leasing and investment. I had an amazing time at Legal and General. The team were brilliant. We left on really good terms. I hope I did a good job there. So I suppose the downside for me was, if it doesn't work, I've lost the money, which would kill me. But I always thought to myself, well, I could just go and either get a leasing job, an investment job, or an asset management job. And so I didn't see it as a huge risk at the time. But we did literally start with nothing. I mean, Zak had a couple of existing clients, but they were only bringing in a very small amount of fee. So it was a true startup. We had a blank piece of paper. How can we go out and win some business? So the risk, I suppose, I'd have lost some money and I'd gone back to basics and I'd probably head held low, and so go crawling back to one of my previous employers, I guess. But as I say, at the time, it just felt exciting. But that's probably because I'm an eternal optimist and I just naively just struck into it.
Were you married at the time?
No, I wasn't, no. So I had a girlfriend who's now my wife. But she was encouraging. She's also a businesswoman and very, very career focused. So from her perspective, she was, I think I mentioned, I want to go and set up on my own. She's like, when? Go and do it now. And I was having to control her, saying, well, we need to write a business plan. So, I think the risk was, the downside wasn't as scary as it seemed.
And how much analysis, or how much research did you do in terms of looking into the different types of business models? Because it sounds like it's just third-party asset management, fee income, stroke business, targeted at quite a niche group of UK institutional fund managers, thinking that they're going to have surplus work that they can give you for a fee and you can do a better job on it. Did you think about doing the co-invest and sourcing the deals, or was that literally just a natural evolution of the business as it grew at that stage?
We only ever anticipated to become an asset management platform. We wanted to be a big asset management platform, but we wanted to be sort of the Hudson Lone Star kind of operation, in the fact that we were just the asset managers delivering really good transformation of buildings and added value to those buildings. We didn't once think for one moment that we may be a fully fledged developer in a few years' time, but it just took a natural course. And we still offer an asset management service. It's just that we've we've started to get involved in higher risk transformations, and that seems to be where we sit best. So at the time, it was always ever going to just be an asset management platform. The reason why is because that's what we knew at the time. So Zak was an asset manager, I was an asset manager. We knew that there were people struggling to deliver true added value because of time and lack of resource, and we're here as your extra resource. Sadly, none of them could use us.
And then you stack skills on top of it to enable your business to kind of evolve and do the whole co-invest and be a development manager and start sourcing and then delivering your own schemes with partners.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we describe ourselves as ground up, not investment down. So we're not a load of investment agents that are really good at buying stuff, but I can't actually deliver the projects. We're the guys that would deliver the schemes first. So we're ground up. We're the people on the ground. We're on site. We're in every contractor meeting, and we're the guys that actually deliver those projects for you. Just so happens we can also source deals. So over time, instead of being just a development manager, we've risen up through the ranks, and now we see all of every last office investment that's out there on the market, and then we take it to the right capital, and sometimes we co-invest in those deals and see it through from cradle to grave. Other times we don't co-invest, we just deliver the redevelopment and the leasing for someone that perhaps already owns that building. So it's nice to have a bit of both.
So it's office focused predominantly, and it's UK wide, isn't it? So is it all major kind of UK cities, or how would you segment it?
We've got a lot in Bristol because Matt, Zak and I have very close links to Bristol. So bizarrely, we've ended up probably being Bristol's most active developer at the moment with six schemes in Bristol. We have a lot in London, mainly peripheral London, but a few in central. And then otherwise, it's a combination of the southeast, the sort of Thames Valley and the Big Six. And we tend to focus mainly on town centre, old tired buildings that have good bones that then have the ability to be transformed into a thriving town centre, grade A, best in class office.
There's a lot of commentary around the office sector at the moment. A lot of people don't want to go anywhere near it. What are the biggest challenges that you see of the sector, and then also the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, when you tell someone you're an office developer in the pub, everyone's like, "Oh no, you're an office kid. No one, you don't need an office anymore." Well, it just turns out that doesn't apply to everybody. The office market is challenging, but there is one main trend that you will have heard day in, day out in your role too, Matt, is that there is a flight to quality. So as long as you have the best in class product, your product is going to let. If you have a boring vanilla secondary building, you're in trouble. So from our perspective, if the market is getting smaller and tenants are downsizing, so huge occupiers going from 100,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet, but they want to relocate to somewhere that's better, we'll take the 50,000. But as long as they come to our building, and therefore the building has to be best in class. So it is absolutely our advice to everyone that we work with is imperative that you spend the right amount of money on the building. You can no longer do a lick of paint and a new carpet. You have to do a proper job, and you have to create best in class product. If it's not capable, or you don't have the budget or time to turn that building into best in class, forget it. It might as well go in the tertiary bin. There used to be grade A, B, or B plus B, C, and tertiary. Now it's grade A, best in class.
Is that the super prime part? Because I've heard that term come into the market.
Exactly. So super prime is what you used to call grade A. Everything else goes in the tertiary bin. Might not exist. It might as well not exist.
And that's London, but also across the UK as well. Across
the UK, and there has to be a reason to get people to come back to work and to get out of their home office, or sitting on their sofa with a laptop. And you have to encourage people to come back by offering really great amenities and the things that I was listing before. So just a really fun place to be where you can collaborate with your teams. And that doesn't mean banks of desks, hundreds and hundreds of desks on one floor plate. It means a really nice variation of different spaces that you can occupy. So you want to grab a laptop, go down and sit with a friend on some bean bags in a breakout space. Do you want to go and have a coffee in the coffee shop, or do you want to go outside and work in the outdoor seated working area? Now all those areas need to be well considered, and we need to offer those as landlords. So the outdoor working area needs to be covered so that your screens don't get reflection. It needs to have great Wi-Fi that's uninterrupted so that you've got the confidence to work there and you can have a video call outside. And yeah, I think now is the time to go into super detail to create super prime. You can't scrimp and save, and you can't do anything in a hurry. You need to consider these buildings and just get under the skin of how on earth are we going to get people back to the office. And your buildings need to be the ones that attract those people back.
And is that cross sector in terms of the occupiers that you're appealing to, or is there a particular niche occupier that really this resonates with? Yeah,
I mean, good question. That certainly used to be the case. No, it's not the case at all anymore. And you get lawyers occupying buildings that are super quirky with exposed services. You get the creative agencies that take more corporate buildings. So it's all blurred into one now. I mean, tech and media have been the strongest. It's been the strongest sector for a number of years now, but professional services are now still acquiring really interesting buildings. So gone are the days, I think, where you have a building that you particularly target one sector. That may happen maybe in the insurance district in the city, or Shoreditch, for example. There's a slant towards the sort of creative and media and tech side. But I mean, UK wide, it's a free for all.
Talk to me about the evolving relationship between the landlord and tenant as well, and how that's changed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge change there. When I was a leasing agent, it was very apparent that the landlord-tenant relationship was negotiate a lease through two lawyers, never talk, collect 4 rent checks a year from your tenant, and maybe give them a call just before their lease event, their break or their expiry, to say, are you going to stay or are you going to go? I mean, the most hands-off approach you could get, and that's how it used to be done. Totally different ballgame now. In all of our buildings, there are building apps. So, and that building app is there to not only create a better community and host events and act as access control. It's got a lot of technical uses, but it's also got a direct route and communication link between the end tenant, the end user, Joe Bloggs, that sits on desk number 5 in the office, and the landlord. So you can say, I'm unhappy with the building, it's too hot, the toilet's blocked, there's been a water spillage in the lift lobby, and that comes immediately to us. So it's a really close relationship in terms of ongoing management of those spaces. But also, with us, it happens from the start. So every viewing, someone from V7 is at the viewing.
With the agent?
With the agent, yeah. We're always there to say, this is the building we've created, this is what it's come from, this is what it's gone to, these are the build costs, this is what the ESG credentials are, this is who we were thinking of when we designed this, so that they truly understand the nitty-gritty and the background of the building. So it's authentic, it's transparent. And then we negotiate the leases. So
not the agent?
The agent is there, but we are point contact to negotiate those leases, and we will always have an open dialogue with the tenant. Now, if the tenant would rather go through lawyers, then clearly that can happen too, and the lawyer needs to obviously draft the lease. But the key commercial terms, the amount of times that everyone from V7 is on a call negotiating principle to principle, is considerably more than it is through the lawyers.
Why is that?
Just because they then get to talk to us, they get to understand. We can at least explain why we cannot agree to a certain clause, or whether certain clauses to us matter less. And I think it's just being honest and transparent, and then they have a great feeling. They know exactly where they stand. They don't feel like everything's being over-lawyered. They just know what's important to the landlord and what's not. And that's a great start to kick off a good relationship. And the fact is, if that tenant starts happy, and then through that period, you maintain that communication, that contact, then when it comes to lease event, there's got to be a really good reason why they're going to leave. And if you lose a tenant, it's a disaster, because you then have to go through a releasing campaign, potentially new refurbishment, and that's something that no landlord wants.
Another awful phrase that's used in the kind of office development space is the hotelification of space. do you look to hotels, or do you look to other sectors, or do you even look to other countries and other developers for inspiration? Because a lot of what you're talking about, it seems like you've been on like the front foot of this for years, and a lot of people are kind of catching up to it now, or have been over the last couple of years. Where do you get your inspiration from? Is it that relationship and that dialogue with the tenants and really asking them what they want in their building?
A bit of both. This sounds super cheesy, but bear with me. That we run a thing called the V7 formula at V7. It is nothing more glamorous than an amazing spreadsheet with thousands of photos on it and lots of descriptions of cool things that people have seen or are inspired by. So this formula is broken down into interior, exterior, tech and the app side, what happens on roof terraces, and just etc. So lots of really fun ideas in this formula. But that formula is just pumped full of ideas. And then then when we come to spec a scheme and draw up the development brief, we dip into this formula and we try and take every good idea that anyone's ever had and pump it into the brief. And the reason, the way that these ideas tend to come about is that we take, exactly to your point, inspiration from all other sectors other than offices. The last thing you can do is go and take inspiration from what's happening in the office sector right now, because otherwise they're all going to end up being exactly the same. The best thing to do is take inspiration from hotels, so hotelification. It's a bad word, but it really is important. You can take inspiration from spas if you go to the spa with your wife for the weekend. If you go on holiday, it could be a customer service thing or it could be a physical attribute of a building. You can take inspiration from restaurants and the latest restaurants in London. What are their toilets are like? It's sort of, it goes down into this crazy level of detail. But if you aggregate all of these little ideas and pump them all into one brief, and then you make sure that you deliver that brief into a new office building, people are wowed by amenity and the offer that's actually already being done elsewhere in the world. It's just in different sectors.
You're dealing with a lot of buildings that need to be refurbished. There's no doubt going to be constraints from like a planning position, and obviously to kind of create the additional value, you've got to get massing without getting too technical and further floors. Or how do you navigate that with existing frames and structures and consents to justify and get your return?
So I think from our perspective, there will always be planning constraints. There will always be physical constraints, but we tend to get involved in projects where the fundamentals and the bones of the building are of sufficient quality. So if the floor to ceiling height or the slab to slab height is just simply too low and will never work as a best in class building, then that's probably not a project for us. It's probably a project for a new build developer. But for us, there will be physical constraints, but you can always work around them with some really great design by using the best in class architects. There will be planning constraints, but because you're typically dealing with 1970s, 80s buildings that have been unloved and are super ugly, then we're coming off a low base. So planners tend to be very receptive to our proposals in terms of transformation of the look and feel. Then it's just a case of how big can you go. And before we end up going through the planning process, we'll always have one or two pre-apps, sometimes three, and we'll always have detailed DD advice way before we start the whole design process. So we'll work with planners, with rights of light, daylight, sunlight consultants, structural engineers, just to make sure that the principles of what we're looking to achieve are correct.
From an ESG perspective, there's lots of different accreditations, and it's a bit of a minefield. How do you navigate that, and how do you kind of stick the V7 badge against particular credentials? Because sometimes they're at loggerheads against each other, right?
Yeah, the credentials is a really difficult one right now. I'm probably going to upset loads of people saying this, but for us, the number one credential, but it's not even an accreditation, is net zero carbon. There are 52 billion tons of carbon pumped into our atmosphere every year, and I'm not saying we're gonna change that hugely, but we will try and change that where we possibly can. And from our perspective, achieving a net zero carbon building is incredibly difficult. So obviously, as part of the refurbishment, you have to use carbon, and that is because we're putting new equipment into the buildings. But as I said before, if we use less and challenge where possible, we will end up using the smallest amount of carbon as possible that goes into the building in the embodied carbon, and then that'll have to be offset. And you'll have to use a credible offset scheme, which I could talk about this for hours, but there aren't very many at all. There are very, very few, and that's really difficult for us, because once you've gone through this arduous process of refurbishing a building, you've used as little carbon as possible, and you're left with this amount that you have to offset. Where do you offset it? Because you want to know that every pound that goes into your offset is used constructively and doesn't go into a chief executive's pocket and you end up with 10p in the pound going to planting trees. You want 99p of your pound to go and plant trees. So the net zero carbon piece is really important, and it's the most important part. And then you want to have a net zero carbon building in operation, so running the building forward. Is it all electric? Can you acquire your electricity from a renewable provider? At the moment, that's incredibly challenging, but that's opening up as well. Are you using cleaning materials that are net zero carbon? And you have to think about all of these last details. So embodied and operational net zero is the most important requirement at the moment from ESG. In terms of accreditations, the only two that we think are worth their weight in gold at the moment are BREEAM, and that's quite often a planning requirement now, and NABERS, which is an Australian accreditation which come over in the last few years, again run by the BRE, and that is ensuring that buildings are run efficiently in terms of operational energy. And those two, so BREEAM coupled with NABERS coupled with net zero carbon, should give you a building which is truly sustainable. The others, like you've got WELL, Fitwell, LEED, SCAR, all of the other nice accreditations, if you can get them and they actually add something to the development, great. But don't just get them because they're badges and they're easy to get. If they're low-hanging fruit, they're probably not going to add much to it, and you're not really doing it for the right reason.
Who's demanding these ESG credentials? Is it V7? Is it the capital behind you, or is it the occupiers, or is it a combination of all three that is driving and moving this forward?
I would love to say it's the occupier, and that is changing over time. But right now, it's not the occupier that's demanding these. It tends to be, it's coming from the investors, which is a good thing, but they're being led by developers like us. So we have to filter through this sort of sea of accreditations and pick out the ones that we feel are truly add value and also, force us to do things for the right reasons. Those in turn will filter down to the occupiers and also filter up to the investors, and the investors will end up, they have already, this is happening industry-wide, is that they have a set of requirements that will not enable them to buy a building unless it hits certain credentials. So the whole industry is moving together, but I think that the developers and the guys that are sort of on the ground, all of the professional teams and consultants are really driving this forward.
As we look to kind of the net zero in 2030, you must be looking at the kind of the landscape at the moment going, there's a massive opportunity in the UK to pick off buildings or work on schemes which people just don't have the capability to be able to refurb and produce best-in-class assets. How excited are you about that opportunity, or is it, how do you segment that down?
I mean, there has never been a better time to be a developer of offices for that reason, and that's because there are hundreds of thousands of EPC C and below buildings in the office space, and they will all need to be brought up to a B as a minimum by 2030. There is this massive wave of unrefurbished buildings coming down the pipe, and I don't think it's really hit investors' radars yet. I think they're all in a position where they're saying, well, I've got some tenants in there till 2028, so I'll think about it at the time. But the issue is, if you start thinking about it then, you're going to have an empty building for a pretty long time. You need to be really starting now to think about where are my pinch points in terms of EPCs. The MEES regulations are really, really quite stringent, and by 2030 your building will be unlettable and unsellable if it was a C or worse, sorry. So yeah, for us, we see it as a massive opportunity, especially the bigger buildings that are going to really take some transformation with older M&E, older facades, older glazing. It's going to be a real challenge to get those back up to a B.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation, you've grown V7, the headcount's currently 17. Can you talk to me about how you've gone about building a high-performing team and, some of the challenges and some of the things that have gone quite well with doing that?
Sure. We're a team of 17. We never really had any plans to get to 17 or anywhere near that size. We just wanted to be a super profitable niche team. But this team of 17 that we work with now, they're amazing. They are all on the same journey. They're all wanting to achieve the same thing. Everyone is pushing, and they're pushing us on the green agenda to make sure we're doing things for the right reasons, which is it just feels like such a good team to have on board at the moment and to work with. And we're excited to work with them every day. The way we work as a business, and this again sounds a little bit cheesy, but we're a strength-based organization. And what we mean by that is that we don't focus on people's weaknesses. So the analogy I would give is you've got a rugby team, you've got a prop forward who sits in the scrum. He's a big lad, he can push very well and is very strong. And you've got a winger who's a very small guy, but he's very fast on the wing. You would never swap those roles. You'd never put the winger in the scrum and expect him to do a good job. So at V7, we very, very consciously decide, right, what are they really good at? We test those strengths using the Gallup strengths test. That tells everybody what someone's top 34 strengths are. We then leverage off those strengths really heavily. And if their role involves something they're not particularly strong at, then our concept is we get someone in who's really good at that particular thing. So
to support them, to take that off their way.
Yeah, exactly. And so ideally, in an ideal world, and there'll always be slight differences, but we think that our team all do what they're really good at. And that is the perfect way to be as a team, because you have everyone moving towards the same goal at things that they enjoy and they're good at, and you're leveraging off all of those strengths. If we focused every year, got to appraisal time every year and said, yeah, but you're not only good at these 5 things, and said that to everybody, all that's going to do is demotivate, disappoint, and these people will be jumping up and down saying, yes, but we're no good at that bit. I want to do the stuff I'm good at. So a strength-based approach, we think, is the most proactive and empowers the team to the best of their ability. So from a business perspective, if you've got everyone doing what they love and what they're good at, you should smash it.
How do you split your roles between yourself, Zak, and Ben then? 3.
So myself, Matt, Zak and Matt.
Zak and Matt, sorry, yeah.
So we tend to divide it quite nicely. From on my side, my background is leasing, and on the investment side, so I tend to focus quite heavily on the development management side, just as project lead on quite a few projects. I focus very heavily on the leasing side, so I work with our in-house leasing manager, it's her role just to sit and ensure that we chase up every last lead and make sure every last viewing goes as well as it possibly can. Then we have Zak, who sits, and maybe in terms of my role, I tend to focus very heavily on sort of business growth and business expansion and strategy as well. So from Zak's point of view, it's more of a COO role where he's fantastic at sort of the operations of the business, HR. He runs the business brilliantly and is incredibly efficient in terms of processes. But he also sits as a project lead on quite a few projects as well. So we like to keep in the projects, but still run the business as well at the same time. And Matt, again, project lead on a few, but his primary focus is on the investment side. So he sits there he has great visibility of the markets and spots opportunity and works very closely with our investment director on the buy side.
What have been some of the learnings that you can reflect on having set up the business? And what advice would you maybe give yourself when you set the business up now that you've learned as we sit here today?
I would say it's incredibly... I'd say the biggest constraint that we have is time. And we were talking offline, just saying how hard we both work. I mean, it's every evening, every weekday evening since I think we started 8 years ago. So you have to have that grit and determination. What advice would I give myself? I think I would say it's going to be harder work than you think, but it'll also be the most rewarding thing you've ever done. So it's a roller coaster, and Matt, Zak, and I and Ben, our other director, we describe it as a roller coaster every day, even 8 years in. Some days are huge highs, some days are huge lows. But if you're in a low, you just need to pick yourself up because you know the next day might be a high. And I think it's so rewarding. Could I ever go back and just go back to a job? I think the answer is no. You get total freedom to go and run the business and lead the business through on a direction that you want to go in and you believe in. And I think what I would say is, from initial advice, I would say it's never as easy to win new businesses as you think it might be. But when you do, it's the best buzz ever.
It sounds like you've built a system almost of, it started quite slowly, but then quite a lot of businesses just come inbound off the back of your schemes. And I guess the product's done the talking in terms of raising kind of capital and expanding the business.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really difficult to, as a small business, if you haven't delivered a lot, it's hard to point at how good you are at delivering. So we've had to be patient, I suppose, and that's working through these projects over time and delivering really good products, to making winning awards for them and making sure that they're recognised and they let quickly and they're successful. And on the back of those, then you can point to your previous track record and say, look, it works. The process works. We've had a lot more inbound business as we've got older. So we're now 8 years old, and a lot of our clients end up coming to us and asking for our opinion, which is incredibly flattering. And we still get a huge buzz from having those moments, as well as going out and pitching for new mandates. So from our perspective, in terms of how we've grown, it's been an organic process, which started off incredibly proactively, and now there's a lot of, I suppose, reactive business that comes in our way as well, which is a nice place to be.
We sit here towards the end of May, halfway through the year almost. As we look forward to 2023 and 2024, what are you most excited about, and what are you looking forward to achieving?
Well, we're still excited to deliver these schemes. I mean, it's the number one thing that gets me out of bed in the morning is the thought of transforming these buildings from something that are terrible performers, and you're almost an embarrassing asset, through to something that is absolute best in class. So that still drives us from our core. I suppose in terms of growth and expansion, we're not looking to get a huge amount bigger from the office side, because we have just such a fantastic team. Our primary focus is to work on larger assets as we grow older, but we know that'll come in time. But a really exciting sector of within the office sector is the growth within London. We've cut our teeth in the regions. We've got a number of London schemes, but we just think London is a huge playground, and we could have a lot of fun there. There's a massive number of buildings that in London that need transforming, and a huge number that are EPCC or worse. So there's this opportunity in this sort of mountain of buildings to go after in London. And then lastly, from a sort of wider helicopter view in terms of the business, we've cut our teeth very strongly in the office sector, and we will always be office specialists. But we are at the moment looking to expand the business by going from office into residential. And under residential, we would put build to rent, straightforward residential development, student, and hotels. So from our side, that will be the next bolt-on. But again, we'll have to be patient. That comes over time. We'll grow that organically. But we see residential and offices, both in specialist teams under the V7 umbrella, as a very good marriage, because resi and offices are getting close to go together.
A question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast as we draw to a close is, if I was to give you £500 million of equity, who are the people, what property and which place would you look to deploy that capital?
Well, who are the people?
You can have your V7 team.
I think the V7 team, I mean, it's a cop-out.
That's a given.
It's a cop-out with the V7 team. I mean, I've got utter faith in those guys. In terms of where we would deploy, I would deploy right now in London. And I think our favourite spot would be Soho. So for us, we would buy old as you can get in terms of secondary mismanaged buildings, and transform them into grade A product, because that's the space that's letting quickest. and it would be in the office sector. It would be best in class offices. But what I would probably be minded to do is look into mixed use as well. So under the same asset, you used to have your office values were always tarnished if there was residential and offices together. And I think the world is becoming closer and more mixed use in general. So I think that's much more accepted. So I think what would my perfect investment be right now? It would be a vacant building in the middle of Soho, probably on Wardour Street, where I could produce best-in-class offices with a load of apartments above it.
Well, Chris, your energy, your enthusiasm, your vision, and the business you're building is certainly kind of infectious and very inspiring. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today and sharing a little bit about your background and route into real estate and also the plans you have for V7 moving forward.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to this episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Subscribe, give us a rating, like or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests we should get on the podcast or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit experienced talent for investors, owners, developers, and operators. So if you're considering your career options at the moment or looking to attract top talent to work for you, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you can find a wealth of research to aid your search. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.